The days following their quiet moments of clarity were filled with an unspoken understanding between Nathaniel and Emma. The weight of their decisions hung in the air, thick and undeniable. They had acknowledged their feelings for each other, but the reality of what that meant, the risks, the consequences, was beginning to take its toll. For Nathaniel, the pressure was mounting. The responsibility he carried as CEO was immense, and now, with Emma in the mix, it felt like everything was on the line. Every decision he made had an extra layer of complexity. Could he keep their relationship a secret? Could he continue to manage the growing tension between them without letting it affect the business? Or would everything they had worked for come crashing down because of the very emotions he had tried to suppress for so long? Emma, too, was feeling the strain. The allure of Nathaniel's attention, the moments they shared in private, were intoxicating. But every time they crossed paths in the office, the professional distance they had once maintained seemed further out of reach. The temptation to give in, to let their feelings take the lead, was growing stronger with each passing day. She had always prided herself on her ability to keep her work and personal life separate, but now, with Nathaniel, that line was becoming dangerously blurry. It was a Wednesday morning when the tension finally boiled over. Nathaniel had been in and out of meetings all day, his mind constantly occupied by the decisions he had to make. The weight of his responsibilities was crushing, but it wasn't just the business that weighed on him. It was the uncertainty of his relationship with Emma. He had kept his distance, maintaining a professional demeanor, but he couldn't ignore the pull between them any longer. Every time their eyes met, every time their hands brushed, it was a reminder of everything they had shared and everything they stood to lose. It was during a meeting in the conference room that the moment came. Nathaniel had asked Emma to join him to discuss an upcoming presentation, but as soon as she stepped into the room, he could see something in her eyes, something that spoke volumes. She wasn't as composed as usual, her gaze shifting between him and the floor, as though she was afraid of saying the wrong thing. As the meeting went on, Nathaniel couldn't focus. His mind kept drifting back to her, the way she made him feel, the way her presence seemed to calm his racing thoughts. But there was no room for distractions now. He had to remain focused, for the sake of the company, for the sake of their professional relationship. "Emma," he said, his voice sharper than he intended, snapping her out of her thoughts. "Can we go over the data again? We need to make sure the numbers align with the projections." Emma nodded quickly, her fingers nervously adjusting the papers in front of her. "Of course," she said, her voice steady but with an underlying tension. But Nathaniel noticed it. The way she avoided his gaze, the way she seemed to pull back whenever their eyes met. It was as though she was afraid of crossing a line, and in that moment, he realized she was just as conflicted as he was. Finally, after a long silence, he spoke again. "Emma, we need to talk." Her eyes flickered up to his, startled by the abruptness of his words. "About what?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "About us," Nathaniel replied, his tone softer now, though still laced with uncertainty. "We can't keep ignoring this, pretending it doesn't matter. What we've shared, it's real. And I don't want to run from it." Emma's heart raced at his words. She had known this conversation was coming, but hearing him say it out loud made everything feel more tangible. The weight of their decisions, the risks they were both taking, suddenly felt very real. "I don't want to pretend either," she whispered, her voice soft but firm. "But what does this mean for us? For the company? If anyone finds out, it could change everything." Nathaniel's gaze softened, and he stepped closer to her. "I know the risks. But I'm willing to take them. I want this, Emma. But we have to be prepared for the consequences." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She had never seen him like this, so raw, so vulnerable. In that moment, she knew that Nathaniel wasn't just worried about losing control of the business. He was afraid of losing her. "I don't want to lose you, Nathaniel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm scared, 2. What if we can't make it work? What if it all falls apart? Nathaniel reached out, gently cupping her face in his hands. We won't know unless we try. And with that, the space between them closed, and their lips met in a kiss that was soft but full of meaning, a kiss that sealed the promise of what they were willing to risk. The days that followed were filled with the quiet aftermath of their decision. They continued to work side by side, maintaining the facade of professionalism while navigating the complexities of their growing relationship. The tension between them was palpable, but neither of them knew how to move forward without risking everything they had built. For Nathaniel, the pressure of keeping their relationship a secret weighed heavily on him. He could feel the eyes of the company on him, the expectations of his team, and the constant fear that someone would uncover the truth. He didn't know how long they could keep up the charade, but for now, all he could do was focus on the work. Emma, too, struggled with the uncertainty of it all. She had always been in control, but now, with Nathaniel, she found herself at a crossroads. She wanted to be with him, but the risk of losing everything she had worked for, the job she loved, the respect she had earned, was a constant reminder of the stakes. But despite the uncertainty, despite the fear of what might happen next, one thing was clear: they were both all in. Whatever the future held, they were ready to face it together. The weeks following their decision were marked by an unspoken, fragile peace. Nathaniel and Emma continued to work together with the same intensity they always had, but now there was something else between them, something that neither of them knew how to label, but something that couldn't be ignored. The office became a quiet battleground for control, each of them trying to balance their professional lives with their deepening personal connection. Nathaniel's usual stoic demeanor remained intact, but Emma could see the cracks in his composure. He would glance at her during meetings, his gaze lingering just a little too long, and she would catch him watching her across the room when he thought she wasn't looking. There were moments of unspoken understanding, a shared look, a brush of fingers as they passed documents. Moments that made Emma's heart race, but they both kept their distance, afraid of pushing too far, too fast. It wasn't just the workplace that was affected. Emma found herself constantly questioning her feelings for Nathaniel. She had never been the type to mix business with pleasure, but this, whatever this was, felt different. The pull she felt toward him was undeniable, but so was the fear that it would all fall apart. They had both agreed to take things slow, but every passing day made that promise harder to keep. One particularly challenging day, Nathaniel called Emma into his office. The request was simple: he needed her help to finalize an important business deal. It was a critical moment for the company, one that could make or break their next quarter's projections, and Emma's expertise was crucial. When she stepped into his office, she immediately felt the weight of the situation. Nathaniel's usual professional composure was gone. He stood by the window, staring out at the city, his posture rigid, the pressure of the deal taking its toll on him. As she approached, Emma couldn't help but notice the strain on his face, the tension in his jaw. "Emma," he said without turning to her, his voice low, "I need this to go perfectly. This deal, it's everything." Emma stepped closer, her voice calm but steady. "I know. We've got this. We just need to stick to the numbers and make sure everything is in place. We'll get through it." Nathaniel finally turned to face her, his eyes filled with something she couldn't quite read. "I need you more than you know," he admitted quietly. "Not just for this deal. I need you, Emma. This whole thing, this connection between us, it's making it harder to keep my focus. I don't want it to distract us, but I can't ignore it either." Emma's heart skipped a beat. The rawness in his voice, the vulnerability in his eyes, was unlike anything she had ever seen before. For a moment, she forgot about the deal, forgot about the pressure of their professional lives. She saw him, not just as Nathaniel Sterling, the powerful CEO, but as the man she had come to care for, the man she was falling for. "I don't want to distract you either," Emma said softly, stepping closer to him. But I can't pretend that nothing's changed. It has. We've changed. Nathaniel stepped forward, his hand reaching for hers, the connection between them undeniable. We're walking a fine line, Emma, he murmured, his voice filled with frustration. If this gets out, if anyone finds out, it could ruin everything. Emma squeezed his hand gently, her gaze steady. We'll keep it between us. We can make this work. But we need to decide what matters more, this company, or us. Nathaniel's eyes searched hers, and for a moment, the weight of their situation felt heavier than ever. I don't know if I can risk everything for this, he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. Emma took a deep breath, her fingers still intertwined with his. Neither do I. But I can't go back, Nathaniel. We've crossed a line, and now we have to decide if we're willing to take the consequences together. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if weighing her words, before he slowly nodded. Together, he repeated softly. But we have to be careful. We can't let this ruin everything we've worked for. The tension between them was thick, the weight of their decisions settling in the air. Neither of them knew what would happen next, but for the first time, they both acknowledged that they were in this together. They didn't have all the answers, but they had each other, and that, in itself, was something they couldn't ignore. The next few days were a blur of meetings and high-stakes negotiations. Emma and Nathaniel remained professional on the surface, but behind closed doors, the weight of their decisions hung heavy. The chemistry between them was undeniable, but they both understood the risks. If they allowed their emotions to cloud their judgment, everything could fall apart. On the day of the final negotiation, everything seemed to come to a head. The deal they had been working on for weeks was ready to close, but as the meeting progressed, Emma could feel the tension in the room. Nathaniel was distracted, his mind clearly elsewhere. Every time he glanced at her, Emma could see the conflict in his eyes. Finally, as the meeting broke for lunch, Nathaniel pulled her aside, his voice tense. We need to talk. This isn't just about the deal anymore. I can't keep pretending everything's fine when I'm thinking about you every damn second. Emma's heart raced, but she kept her voice steady. Nathaniel, this isn't the time. We can't let this affect the business. Not now. I know, he said, his voice sharp. But I can't keep pretending, Emma. I can't keep fighting this. I want you. But I don't know how to balance it with everything else. Emma closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. I want this, too. But we need to decide what we're willing to risk. I can't keep working like this, Nathaniel. We need clarity. Nathaniel's expression softened, but there was a sadness in his eyes. I don't have all the answers. But I can't do this without you. Emma's chest tightened, but she knew what she had to do. We'll take it one step at a time, she said softly. But we need to make a decision. The longer we keep this a secret, the harder it will get. Nathaniel nodded, his gaze filled with understanding. One step at a time, he repeated. But we need to be ready for the consequences. The days after their heartfelt conversation were a blur of uncertainty for Nathaniel and Emma. Despite their resolve to take things slowly, the weight of their decision to be together hung over them like a shadow. They both knew that they couldn't keep their relationship hidden forever, and yet the fear of what would happen if anyone found out kept them tethered to their professional facades. Nathaniel's days were filled with back-to-back meetings, investor calls, and press events. The pressure on him as CEO was unrelenting, and now, with Emma in the mix, everything seemed even more intense. He couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was bound to go wrong, that the connection they had, no matter how real it felt, would eventually cost them both. For Emma, the weight of secrecy was beginning to take its toll. She had always been able to compartmentalize her work and personal life, but with Nathaniel, that balance was slipping. The way he looked at her across the office, the brief touches, the stolen moments, they were intoxicating, but they were also dangerous. Every day, the stakes grew higher. It was on a Thursday afternoon that the first real test came. Emma was deep in the middle of preparing a major presentation for a potential client. The project was critical, and the pressure to get everything right was immense. She had spent hours going over the details, perfecting the slides, and making sure every statistic was in place. But just as she was about to finalize everything, a message from Nathaniel popped up on her phone. "Nathaniel, we need to talk. In my office." Her heart skipped a beat. She had known this conversation was coming, but she wasn't ready for it. Not yet. Not with everything else going on. She took a deep breath and made her way to Nathaniel's office, her mind racing. She couldn't help but wonder what this was about. Was it about them? About their relationship? Or was it something more professional? She had learned to keep her emotions in check, but with Nathaniel, it was always a struggle. When she entered his office, the tension was palpable. Nathaniel was standing by the window, looking out at the city, his hands clasped behind his back. He turned as she walked in, and his eyes locked onto hers, filled with something she couldn't quite place. "Emma," he began, his voice tight, "we need to talk about the company. About the direction we're heading." She nodded, trying to keep her composure. "Of course. What's going on?" Nathaniel gestured for her to sit, and she did, feeling the weight of the conversation already hanging in the air. "We're facing some challenges. The market isn't responding the way we expected. Investors are getting nervous, and we need to find a solution quickly." Emma's pulse quickened. "What do you need from me?" she asked, trying to focus on the business at hand. Nathaniel took a seat behind his desk, leaning forward as he met her gaze. "I need your expertise. You've been in the trenches with this project from the start, and I trust your judgment. But I also need you to understand the bigger picture. This isn't just about one project. This is about the future of the company." Emma nodded, trying to suppress the rising anxiety in her chest. She knew how important this was, but the weight of Nathaniel's words was too much to ignore. It wasn't just the business, they were in this together, too, and that added a layer of complexity to everything. "We'll figure this out," she said, her voice steady. "But we can't lose focus. Not now." Nathaniel's gaze softened for a moment, but the moment was fleeting. He stood up again, walking over to the window, as if trying to collect his thoughts. "I know. But Emma, there's something else we need to address." Emma's heart sank. She had a sinking feeling that she knew what was coming. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathaniel turned to face her, his expression conflicted. "It's us. The dynamic between us. The tension. I know we've agreed to keep this between us, but I can't keep pretending like everything is normal. The company is already dealing with pressure. And now, with this, it's only making things harder." Emma stood up, her chest tight with emotion. "I didn't ask for this," she said softly, her voice breaking. "I didn't ask to fall for you, Nathaniel. But I can't deny it anymore." Nathaniel's jaw tightened, and he took a step toward her. "Neither can I. But I don't know if we can keep this up. I don't know if we can keep pretending that this isn't affecting everything around us." Emma's heart ached at his words, but she knew he was right. The weight of their relationship, their emotions, was beginning to seep into everything they did. And though neither of them was willing to let go, the reality of the situation was unavoidable. "We'll figure it out," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Together. But we can't keep running from this." Nathaniel nodded, though his expression remained conflicted. "I don't know how much longer we can keep it a secret, Emma." The silence between them was thick with unsaid words, the weight of everything they had built crashing down around them. They had come so far, but now they were at a crossroads. The future was uncertain, and the price of their desire was beginning to reveal itself. The following days were filled with uncertainty. Emma continued to work tirelessly on the client proposal, but her mind kept drifting back to Nathaniel. Their conversation had left a mark on her, and she couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. Would they be able to keep their relationship intact? Would they be able to balance their personal lives with their professional responsibilities? Nathaniel, too, was feeling the weight of their situation. He had always been in control, always kept everything tightly bound, but now, with Emma by his side, the control he had worked so hard to maintain was slipping through his fingers. But no matter how much they tried to distance themselves, the attraction between them was undeniable. The question was no longer about whether they wanted each other, but whether they could afford to continue down this path without risking everything. The next few days passed in a blur of uncertainty. Nathaniel and Emma continued to keep their personal feelings hidden behind the professional masks they had worn for so long. They shared fleeting glances, moments of silence that spoke louder than words, but the tension between them was undeniable. It was as if they were walking a tightrope, trying to maintain their composure while every part of them screamed to cross the line and confront their emotions head-on. But the weight of their secret began to take its toll. Nathaniel couldn't ignore the growing pressure of his responsibilities. The board was breathing down his neck, investors were getting restless, and the stakes of the upcoming presentation were higher than ever. Every decision he made felt heavier, as if the mere possibility of their relationship being discovered would be the catalyst for everything falling apart. Emma, too, felt the strain. She had always been able to compartmentalize her emotions, to keep work and personal life separate. But with Nathaniel, everything had changed. She found herself thinking about him even when they weren't together. His voice, the way he looked at her, the way they shared quiet moments in the office, everything about him pulled her in deeper. It wasn't just the stress of the company that weighed on them, it was the constant internal struggle to keep their feelings under wraps. And the more they tried to ignore it, the harder it became to resist. It was late on a Friday evening when the pressure finally broke. The office was nearly empty, the hum of fluorescent lights the only sound filling the quiet space. Emma had stayed late, finishing up some final details for the proposal, knowing it was crucial for the upcoming client pitch. She was just about to leave when she saw Nathaniel's figure standing in his office doorway. His posture was tense, his face unreadable, as he leaned against the doorframe, watching her. Emma's heart skipped a beat. There was something about the way he was looking at her, soft, but with a weight behind it, that made her uneasy. Emma, Nathaniel's voice broke the silence, low and steady. We need to talk. Her pulse quickened at his words. She had known this moment would come, but she wasn't prepared for it now, not with everything hanging in the balance. About what? She asked, trying to keep her voice calm, though her emotions were running high. Nathaniel stepped into the room, his gaze never leaving hers. About us. About everything that's been building between us. Emma swallowed hard, her heart racing. Nathaniel, we've already talked about this. We agreed to take it slow. I know, he replied, his voice quiet. But I can't keep pretending like nothing's happening between us. It's impossible to ignore. And every time we try to push it down, it feels like we're both suffocating under the weight of it. Emma's chest tightened at his words. She could feel the same pressure building inside of her, the overwhelming desire to be with him, but the fear that giving in would cause everything to collapse. I don't want to ignore it anymore, Nathaniel said, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending everything is fine when you're all I can think about. The rawness in his voice caught Emma off guard. She had always known Nathaniel as the composed, professional CEO, the man who never let anyone see his vulnerabilities. But now, in this moment, she saw a side of him that was completely exposed, and it made her heart ache for him. Nathaniel, she said softly, stepping closer to him. I feel the same way. But we can't keep doing this. We have to make a choice. We can't keep this between us forever. Nathaniel's eyes softened, but there was still a trace of doubt in them. And if we can't make it work? What if everything falls apart? Emma reached out, her hand resting gently on his arm. We take the risk together. If it falls apart, we'll deal with it. But we can't keep pretending like we don't want this, Nathaniel. We deserve more than that. Nathaniel's gaze searched hers, as if looking for some kind of answer, some kind of reassurance. And in that moment, Emma realized that she didn't have the answers either. They were both standing on the edge, not knowing what the future held, but too deeply connected to turn back now. Finally, Nathaniel nodded slowly, his jaw tightening as if he had made a decision. I'm willing to take that risk. I want this, Emma. I want to see where this can go. Emma's heart fluttered at his words. She didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, with Nathaniel standing before her, the world outside their little bubble didn't matter. They had made their choice, they were taking the risk together. And with that decision, the air between them shifted. They both leaned in, way. The weight of the world, the pressure of the company, the fear of what might happen next, all of it melted in that kiss. The following days were filled with a quiet but undeniable shift. Nathaniel and Emma continued to work together, but the unspoken bond between them was now undeniable. They shared more stolen moments, quiet smiles, touches that lingered a little longer than necessary, and conversations that, at times, felt more personal than professional. But they both knew that they were walking a tightrope. The risk was greater than ever. They were both aware of the consequences they faced if anyone found out, but in the privacy of their moments together, the fear seemed to melt away. They had made their choice, and now it was a matter of deciding how far they were willing to go to protect what they had. But the storm was coming. No secret could stay hidden forever. And as the pressure of the business grew, so too did the strain on their connection. They knew that one wrong move could send everything crashing down, but for now, they were content to hold on to what they had, taking it one step at a time. As the days passed, Nathaniel and Emma found themselves in a delicate dance. They were walking a fine line, trying to keep their burgeoning relationship hidden while managing the increasing pressure of the business. Every touch, every glance, felt like a silent agreement between them. They couldn't turn back now. But with every moment that passed, the weight of the consequences seemed to grow heavier. Nathaniel's days became a blur of board meetings, investor calls, and negotiations, but his mind was constantly pulled toward Emma. Despite his best efforts to remain professional, his thoughts always seemed to drift back to her. Her smile, the way her eyes lit up when she was passionate about something, they were both a distraction and a source of comfort. But he knew that the more he allowed himself to be consumed by these feelings, the more dangerous the situation became. Emma, on the other hand, struggled to balance her emotions. She was falling harder for Nathaniel than she ever expected, but every time they shared a moment of closeness, a part of her felt guilty. The fear of what could happen if their secret came to light gnawed at her. She wasn't just afraid of losing her job, or Nathaniel, she was afraid of how this might change the person she had worked so hard to become. She had always prided herself on her professionalism, but now, it felt like she was at a crossroads. One Tuesday morning, Emma sat at her desk, preparing for a high-stakes meeting with potential investors. The room was full of anticipation, everyone knew how crucial this meeting was for the company's future. The stakes were higher than ever, and the pressure was mounting. Nathaniel entered the conference room, his usual confident stride matched with a focused expression. He stood at the head of the table, briefly surveying the room before locking eyes with Emma. For a moment, everything else faded away. In the midst of all the chaos, they shared a brief moment of silent understanding. It was a fleeting connection, but it spoke volumes, an unspoken promise that, no matter what happened in the meeting, they were in this together. As the meeting began, Nathaniel's attention shifted back to the matter at hand. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that things between them were no longer just about business. With every word he spoke, she felt her pulse quicken. Every time their eyes met, her heart raced. It was getting harder to separate her emotions from her work. As the meeting dragged on, Emma felt a familiar tension building in the pit of her stomach. She had to keep her focus on the presentation, but the knowledge that Nathaniel was watching her, that their unspoken connection was lingering in the background, made it almost impossible to concentrate. At the end of the meeting, as the investors began to file out, Nathaniel approached Emma at her desk. The intensity of his gaze sent a shiver down her spine. "Emma," Nathaniel said quietly, his voice lower than usual. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" Emma nodded, her heart racing. The office had emptied out, leaving only the two of them in the quiet room. "Is everything okay?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Nathaniel hesitated before answering. "I just wanted to make sure you're all right. I know things have been complicated. And I don't want you to feel overwhelmed by everything going on." His words hit her harder than she expected. She could see the genuine concern in his eyes, and in that moment, all the walls she had built around herself began to crumble. "I'm fine," she said, though she wasn't sure if she was convincing him or herself. "But it's not just the business. It's everything, Nathaniel. The way we're doing this. I feel like we're both walking around pretending nothing's different, but it's affecting everything. Me, you, even the work we're doing." Nathaniel looked away, his expression conflicted. "I don't want to lose you. But I don't know how to make this work. The company, the board, the investors, it's all so much. And then there's us." Emma stepped closer to him, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the weight of the words they were finally allowing themselves to say. "I don't know how to make it work either," she whispered, her voice filled with vulnerability. "But I can't keep pretending I don't feel something for you. It's too much, Nathaniel. It's tearing me apart." The silence between them was thick, filled with the weight of everything that had been left unsaid for so long. Nathaniel closed his eyes, taking a deep breath before finally speaking. "I don't want to hurt you, Emma. But I don't know if I can keep doing this, if I can keep risking everything for us. I need to know if you're ready for the consequences of this, because I don't think I am." Emma's chest tightened. She knew exact what he was saying, and though it terrified her, she couldn't walk away from him. She had already crossed a line, and there was no turning back. "I don't know if I'm ready either," she admitted. "But I can't go on pretending like nothing is happening between us. I don't know what the consequences will be, but I'm willing to find out. Together." Nathaniel's expression softened, and he reached for her hand, his grip gentle but firm. "I don't want to lose you, Emma. But I need you to understand that we might not be able to come back from this. Everything could change." Emma nodded, squeezing his hand in return. "I'm willing to face whatever comes, as long as we're facing it together." The moment between them lingered, filled with the weight of their decisions. They had crossed a line, and now, there was no going back. The question was no longer about whether they could keep their feelings hidden. It was about whether they could handle the fallout, the consequences that came with stepping outside of the boundaries they had worked so hard to create. As the days passed, Emma and Nathaniel continued to navigate the increasingly complex dynamics between them. They were in uncharted territory, unsure of how to proceed or what to expect. Every day felt like a test of their resolve, and the risks only seemed to grow with each passing moment. But as they stood on the precipice of everything they had built, one thing was clear: they were both all in. They had made their choice, and now they had to face whatever came next, together. The days following their difficult conversation felt like a slow burn. Nathaniel and Emma continued to work side by side, but the air between them was charged with an energy that neither could deny. Every moment they shared felt like it was leading to something bigger, something inevitable. The connection between them was undeniable, but so was the fear of what could happen if they couldn't find a way to make it work. For Nathaniel, the pressure had reached a boiling point. As CEO, he was accustomed to carrying the weight of the company on his shoulders, but now, with Emma's presence in his life, and their growing feelings for each other, the pressure was becoming too much to bear. He couldn't focus the way he used to. His mind constantly wandered back to her, to the way she made him feel alive in ways he hadn't expected. But every time their eyes met, every time they shared a quiet moment, it was a reminder of the consequences that loomed over them. The company, the board, the investors, they were all waiting for him to make a mistake. Emma, too, was struggling. She had always kept her professional life separate from her personal feelings, but now, with Nathaniel, everything was blurred. Every conversation, every decision felt like it had double the weight. She could no longer pretend that she didn't care about him, didn't care about what they had. But the fear of losing her career, of everything falling apart, haunted her. Every step. It was a Thursday afternoon when the storm finally arrived. The company had just closed a major deal with a potential investor, but things had not gone as smoothly as expected. During a meeting, Nathaniel had learned that an internal leak had exposed some sensitive information about the company's finances, information that could potentially damage their reputation. The moment he found out, his first instinct was to protect the business. But as the details of the leak were revealed, he realized that the source was someone very close to him, someone inside the company who had access to confidential information. Someone who had been at the heart of the project for months. Emma. Nathaniel stood in the conference room, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The room was tense with the silence that followed. The realization hit him like a wave. Emma had always been honest, always been professional. But now, the situation was more complicated than he ever could have imagined. She was the last person he thought would be involved in any sort of betrayal, yet here he was, facing a reality that threatened everything they had built, personally and professionally. Emma, Nathaniel said, his voice low and controlled, but the edge of concern was unmistakable. What is this? Why would you do this? Emma's face went pale. She had no idea how he had discovered the truth so quickly. But in the pit of her stomach, she knew this was the moment everything had been leading to, the moment where the consequences of their actions would finally catch up with them. I didn't do anything wrong, she said, her voice shaking slightly, but she held his gaze, refusing to back down. I was just doing my job. Someone must have manipulated the system. Nathaniel's expression was unreadable as he crossed his arms. I want the truth, Emma. Now. What's really going on? Emma's heart raced, the pressure mounting as the room seemed to close in around her. She had worked so hard to get to this point, to prove herself in a male-dominated industry. She had never been anything but loyal to Nathaniel and the company. But the more she tried to explain herself, the more the weight of the situation seemed to press down on her. I don't know who's behind this, Nathaniel, she said, her voice breaking as the frustration finally bubbled to the surface. But I swear to you, I didn't do this. Nathaniel could see the sincerity in her eyes, the way her hands trembled as she spoke. He wanted to believe her. But with everything on the line, he couldn't ignore the possibility that the situation was more complicated than it appeared. I don't know what to believe anymore, Nathaniel said, his voice quieter, filled with uncertainty. This is bigger than both of us. I can't afford to take any chances. The hours that followed were a blur. The investigation into the leak took over the company, and Emma was placed on administrative leave while they reviewed the evidence. Nathaniel was caught in the middle, torn between his loyalty to the company and his feelings for Emma. He wanted to believe her, to give her the benefit of the doubt, but the stakes were too high. Emma's world came crashing down. The thought of losing her career, losing Nathaniel, losing everything, was too much to bear. She spent the rest of the day at home, trying to make sense of what had happened, of the choices she had made, and of the future that seemed to be slipping away from her. She had tried to protect the company, had tried to stay true to Nathaniel, but now, everything was falling apart. The next morning, Nathaniel came to her apartment. He hadn't heard from her since the night before, and the guilt of everything that had happened gnawed at him. He knocked on the door, his heart heavy with the weight of the situation. When Emma opened the door, her eyes were red from lack of sleep, her face pale. She had spent the night replaying every decision she had ever made, every moment that had led to this point. "I'm sorry," Nathaniel said quietly, his voice filled with regret. "I don't know who to trust anymore. This is bigger than us, Emma." Emma looked at him, her heart aching. "I never wanted this, Nathaniel. I didn't want to hurt you. But I don't know what's happening. Someone's framing me." "I know," he said, his voice filled with frustration and pain. "But I can't do this alone. I need to know that we can get through this together." Emma nodded, though the fear of what would come next still weighed on her. They had already crossed so many lines. Could they survive the consequences of their choices? Could they repair the damage they had caused, not just to the company, but to their relationship? The days that followed Nathaniel's visit to Emma's apartment were filled with tension and confusion. The company was on the brink, the internal investigation pressing forward, and Emma found herself at the center of it all. No matter how much she insisted that she hadn't been involved in the leak, the evidence seemed damning. Emails, financial reports, and company data, things that only someone in her position could access, had all been compromised. Nathaniel, too, was torn. He had known Emma for years. He had trusted her, relied on her, and despite everything, a part of him still wanted to believe she was innocent. But in the face of mounting pressure from the board and investors, he knew he couldn't afford to let personal feelings cloud his judgment. He had to protect the company, protect the future of everything he had built. But every time he looked at Emma, he saw the woman he had come to care for, the woman who had become more than just his assistant. And it broke him inside to see her caught in the crossfire of something so much bigger than either of them. By the end of the week, the pressure had reached a breaking point. The company's reputation was on the line, and the board had made it clear that they wanted answers. Emma's leave of absence had turned into a suspension, and she was no longer welcome in the office. Nathaniel continued to make decisions, but everything he did seemed to be watched more closely now. His every move was scrutinized, his loyalty questioned. And the hardest part was that he couldn't confide in anyone, not fully. The investigation team had asked for Emma's email history, her access logs, everything she had touched over the past few weeks. Nathaniel knew that if the wrong information was discovered, if the leak was traced back to her in any way, everything would be ruined, her career, his career, and their relationship. Every time Nathaniel walked into the office, the weight of it all pressed down on him. It wasn't just the business that was at risk, it was the woman he was falling in love with. It was a Friday afternoon when Nathaniel finally made the decision to visit Emma again. The board's demands were growing louder, and the stress of the situation was starting to take its toll on him. He knew that if he didn't do something, if he didn't confront Emma directly, he would lose her forever, and the company with it. Nathaniel drove to Emma's apartment, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. He had spent the entire day in meetings, discussing strategies to mitigate the damage to the company's reputation, all while keeping his emotions in check. He knew that confronting Emma about the investigation was something he couldn't delay any longer. He had to know the truth. When he arrived at her apartment, he knocked, his hand trembling slightly as he did. Emma opened the door, her eyes tired, but the moment she saw him, her expression softened. "Nathaniel," she whispered, stepping aside to let him in. They didn't speak at first. Instead, they stood in silence, the weight of their unspoken feelings hanging in the air. Emma had always been the calm, professional assistant. Focused, diligent. But now, she was a woman on the edge, grappling with the uncertainty of everything that had happened, everything that was at risk. "I came to talk," Nathaniel said finally, his voice low but filled with determination. "About everything. The investigation, and us." Emma looked down, her chest tightening. Nathaniel, I swear to you, I didn't do it. I didn't leak anything. I don't know who did this, but I'm not involved. Nathaniel studied her for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. He wanted to believe her, so badly. I believe you, he said quietly, his voice steady. But the evidence is there, Emma. And I need to know who's behind this. If it wasn't you, then who? Tears welled in Emma's eyes, but she quickly wiped them away, trying to stay composed. I don't know. I didn't do this. But whoever is behind it is trying to destroy everything. Not just the company, everything. Nathaniel took a step closer, his hand resting on her shoulder. I'm here. We'll figure this out. But you need to tell me everything. We need to trust each other if we're going to get through this. Emma looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and hope. I trust you. But I'm scared, Nathaniel. If they find out the truth, if they find out about us. Nathaniel's heart clenched. He stepped closer to her, his voice softening. No one can find out, Emma. Not yet. We need to keep this quiet while we get to the bottom of the leak. If this comes out now, it'll ruin everything. Emma nodded, her heart heavy. But if we keep this secret, if we keep pretending we're only going to make things worse. I can't keep lying to myself, Nathaniel. We've already crossed a line. Nathaniel paused, his breath catching in his throat. He had known this conversation was inevitable. They couldn't keep pretending that nothing had changed. They couldn't keep hiding what they felt for each other. It was no longer about the business, or the company. It was about them. You're right, he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. We've crossed that line, Emma. And I can't go back. I don't want to go back. Emma stepped closer to him, her heart racing. Then what do we do? Nathaniel reached for her hand, his fingers brushing hers. We do what we've always done. We fight. Together. For the first time in days, the air between them seemed to clear. The weight of their decisions, the fear of the unknown, was still there, but in that moment, they had each other. And together, they could face whatever came next. The following days were a blur of uncertainty. Nathaniel and Emma worked together, trying to piece together the truth behind the leak. They kept their personal connection hidden, but it was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain the distance. Every moment they shared was filled with a sense of urgency, as if time was running out. The board had called for a meeting the following week, demanding answers. The company's future was at risk, and the clock was ticking. Nathaniel and Emma both knew that whatever happened next, everything would change. There was no going back. The storm was coming, and they would have to face it head-on. But in that moment, as they stood together, side by side, Emma felt a flicker of hope. They had made it this far, together. And for better or for worse, they were ready to face whatever came next. The air in the office felt suffocating. Nathaniel and Emma could feel the weight of the impending storm. The leak investigation had reached a critical point, and the company's future hung in the balance. The board had made it clear, they were running out of patience. Nathaniel's every move was under scrutiny, and the pressure to resolve the issue was becoming unbearable. For the first time in months, Nathaniel found himself questioning everything. His ability to run the company, his relationship with Emma, he was being torn apart. Every decision he made seemed to push him further into a corner, and the fear that something catastrophic was going to happen loomed over him like a shadow. Emma, too, was on the edge. The hours she spent working alongside Nathaniel, trying to unravel the mystery of the leak, felt like a constant reminder of everything at risk. The work was exhausting, but the emotional toll was even worse. Every time she looked at Nathaniel, she was reminded of how far they had come, and how much they stood to lose. Despite the mounting pressure, there were moments, fleeting moments, when their connection felt like an anchor. The stolen glances, the brief touches, the way Nathaniel's eyes softened when they were alone. But even those small moments felt increasingly dangerous. The risk of exposure, the fear of being discovered, had never been greater. The breaking point came sooner than expected. It was a Friday afternoon when Nathaniel called Emma into his office. The final round of investigations had concluded, and the board was calling an emergency meeting to address the situation. The room was filled with tension as Nathaniel and Emma sat side by side, waiting for the board members to arrive. Emma could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her, the air thick with uncertainty. Nathaniel's face was set in a mask of professionalism, but Emma could see the storm brewing beneath the surface. His jaw was clenched, his eyes tight with worry. She knew what was coming. The board was going to demand answers, and they weren't going to be kind. "Emma," Nathaniel said, his voice low, breaking the silence. "Whatever happens in there, we need to stick together. No matter what they say." Emma nodded, her heart in her throat. "We've made it this far, Nathaniel. We'll get through this. But I need to know that you're not just doing this for the company, but for us." Nathaniel looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of uncertainty and resolve. "I'm doing this for you, Emma. I'm doing this for us. But I won't let the company fall apart. I can't." The board members filed into the room, their faces serious and their eyes narrowed. The atmosphere in the room was tense, each person aware that this was the moment everything would change. The head of the board, a seasoned and stern man, stood at the front of the room. "Nathaniel," he began, his voice sharp, "we've reviewed the findings. The leak has damaged the company's reputation, and we need answers. Now." Nathaniel straightened, his gaze meeting each of the board members in turn. He took a deep breath before speaking. "We've already begun the investigation, and we're doing everything we can to find the person responsible." The board member scoffed. "That's not good enough. The investors are losing confidence, and we can't afford another mistake. We need to know who's behind this, and we need to know now." Emma watched Nathaniel closely, her heart pounding as he struggled to keep his composure. She knew how much he had invested in this company, how much it meant to him. But as the board continued to press him, it became clear that they weren't going to let up. The pressure was overwhelming, and Nathaniel was starting to crack under the weight of it all. "Nathaniel," the board member said, his voice cold, "you've been in charge of this company for years. If you can't fix this, we'll have to consider new leadership." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Nathaniel's face paled. Emma could see the strain in his eyes, the sheer exhaustion from trying to hold everything together. It was then that the silence broke. The room fell into a tense stillness as Emma stood up from her seat, her heart racing. She could no longer keep silent. The weight of everything she had been carrying, the fear of being exposed, the pressure of her relationship with Nathaniel, the burden of the investigation, was too much. "I did not leak the information," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "But if you want to blame someone for this, you can blame me. I've been the one who's kept this company afloat for years. I've been the one who's put in the hours, the work. But I can't keep doing this, pretending nothing is wrong. I've kept secrets for too long." The board members stared at her in shock, and Nathaniel's face turned to stone. He hadn't expected this. "What are you talking about, Emma?" Nathaniel asked, his voice low, a touch of confusion and concern laced in his tone. "I'm talking about the truth," she replied, taking a deep breath. "We've both been hiding. We've been hiding behind the facade of professionalism, pretending that we could keep our personal lives separate from the business. But the truth is, Nathaniel, I've fallen for you. And I can't keep pretending it's not affecting everything around us." The room went silent. The board members exchanged glances, and Emma could feel the weight of their judgment hanging over her. But in that moment, she didn't care. She had said what she needed to say, and the truth was out. Nathaniel looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and guilt. "Emma," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Emma turned to him, her heart breaking. "I'm sorry, Nathaniel. But I can't keep doing this. I can't keep hiding who I am, who we are." The fallout from Emma's confession was immediate. The board was furious, but what they hadn't anticipated was the outpouring of support from the rest of the company. Emma had been the one who had always held everything together, and despite the personal complications, she had always been the professional they could count on. The reality of their relationship might have been a liability, but it wasn't going to destroy everything they had built. Nathaniel, though, was left with a choice. He could either stand with Emma, take the risk of losing everything, or he could let her go to protect the company. The weight of the decision was almost unbearable. The aftermath of Emma's confession sent shockwaves through the office. The board members were silent for what felt like an eternity, their eyes scanning the room, each person trying to process what had just happened. Nathaniel stood there, frozen, unsure of how to respond. His mind was spinning, the weight of the situation crashing down on him. Emma had risked everything. She had exposed their deepest secret, one that they had worked so hard to keep hidden. But the truth was out now, and there was no going back. The board finally broke the silence. The head of the board, an older man with a steely gaze, spoke first. "Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice measured but firm, "this is a serious breach of company protocol. I'm not just talking about the leak anymore. I'm talking about the lack of discretion. This is not the kind of behavior we expect from the leadership of this company." Emma's heart sank as the board member's words hit her like a punch. She had known the risks, had known what might happen if their relationship came to light. But she hadn't anticipated the full force of the board's disapproval. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. His gaze flickered between the board members, trying to remain composed. He had spent years building this company, and now, it was all crumbling in front of him. He had to make a decision, and it had to be quick. He turned to the head of the board. "I agree that this situation is unorthodox, but I won't throw Emma under the bus," Nathaniel said, his voice steady but laced with determination. "She is not the source of the leak. We've spent days reviewing the data. There's no evidence linking her to this breach. This is not about personal relationships, it's about the future of this company." The board members exchanged uneasy glances, but the head of the board remained stoic. "The personal relationship is exactly the issue, Nathaniel. You're distracted. The company is distracted. We can't afford any more mistakes." Emma, unable to stay silent, stood up. "I've worked my hardest for this company. I've given everything. You think I would destroy everything I've worked for? This is about someone else, someone who has been using this situation to tear us apart. You need to look beyond what you see on the surface." Her voice rang out, filled with a sense of purpose that even she didn't realize she still had. The pressure of the moment pushed her to speak the truth she had been avoiding for so long. She wasn't just defending herself, she was fighting for the future they had built together. Nathaniel looked at Emma, his heart swelling with pride. She had always been the backbone of the company, the quiet force holding everything together. And now, she was standing up, not just for their relationship but for everything they had worked for. He knew then that he couldn't let her go. Not now. Not ever. "Emma's right," Nathaniel said firmly, his eyes locking with the head of the board. "We need to focus on finding the true source of the leak. If we don't, we risk everything, our reputation, our investors, our future. I won't let this company go down without a fight." The board members were quiet, processing his words. The tension in the room was palpable. Nathaniel knew that his words might not be enough to convince them, but he couldn't let Emma face the consequences alone. She had done nothing wrong. This was about the company, about their survival, and about the truth. Finally, the head of the board spoke. "You've made your point, Nathaniel. But know this, if this goes any further, if there's even a hint that this personal relationship is compromising the company's integrity, there will be consequences. We're giving you a chance to resolve this, but we won't hesitate to take action if it affects the business." Nathaniel nodded, his chest tight. "I understand. But I will do everything in my power to protect the company and the people I care about." That evening, after the board meeting, Nathaniel and Emma sat alone in his office. The weight of what had happened hung heavily between them. The tension was thick, but there was something else in the air, a quiet understanding. Emma had always been the one to hold her emotions close, to keep things professional. But now, with everything on the line, she couldn't keep her feelings hidden anymore. The truth had come out, and they had both been forced to confront what had always been there, simmering beneath the surface. "Do you think they'll let us keep our jobs?" Emma asked quietly, her voice filled with uncertainty. Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. But I'm not going to let them destroy everything we've built. We'll find the real culprit. We'll clear your name." Emma met his gaze, her heart racing. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that they could survive this. But the fear of what might happen next, of losing everything, was overwhelming. "I don't want to lose you," Nathaniel said, his voice rough with emotion. "Not now. Not after everything." Emma stood up and walked over to him, taking his hand in hers. She could feel the tremor in his grip, the fear he was trying so hard to hide. The same fear that had been gripping her for days. "You won't lose me," she said softly. "But we have to be ready. We have to face whatever comes next, together." Nathaniel looked up at her, his eyes filled with both fear and determination. "We'll get through this. I'll make sure of it." Emma squeezed his hand, feeling a flicker of hope in the midst of everything. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like they were in this together. And that, at least, was something to hold on to. The next few days were filled with non-stop action. Nathaniel and Emma worked tirelessly to uncover the source of the leak, but the investigation had stalled. They both knew time was running out. If the board didn't get results soon, they would take matters into their own hands. The pressure was mounting, and every day felt like a ticking clock. But the breakthrough came when Emma discovered an anomaly in the financial records. A pattern that seemed to lead back to a former employee, someone who had been fired months ago. Emma worked alongside Nathaniel to dig deeper, and soon, they had the evidence they needed to clear her name and expose the true culprit. When they presented their findings to the board, the mood shifted. The tension in the room was still palpable, but there was a sense of relief in the air. The leak was traced back to an external hacker, someone who had gained access to the company's systems through a vulnerable security loophole. The board members exchanged glances, and for the first time in days, they seemed willing to listen. They cleared Emma of any wrongdoing, and Nathaniel was able to regain control of the situation. With the investigation concluded and the company's future secure, Nathaniel and Emma were left with one final decision: what came next for them? They had fought for their relationship, for their future together, but now they had to face the reality of what that future would look like. Nathaniel stood by Emma, his arm around her as they gazed out at the city skyline from his office window. "We've made it through the worst of it," he said quietly. Emma leaned into him, her heart full. "Together," she whispered. "We made it together." As the sun set over the horizon, Nathaniel knew one thing for certain: whatever the future held, they would face it side by side. Together, they had conquered the storm. The dust had finally settled. The leak that had nearly torn the company apart was no longer the focus of their lives. Emma's name had been cleared, and the company's reputation had been restored. Nathaniel had weathered the storm, and so had Emma. But in the quiet aftermath, they both knew that the hardest part wasn't over. They had faced a crisis, fought for their relationship, and emerged stronger, but the real challenge was yet to come, defining what they meant to each other in the wake of everything that had happened. The line between their personal and professional lives had blurred, and there was no easy way to untangle it. Nathaniel sat in his office, staring at the city skyline, the weight of the past few weeks still hanging heavily in his chest. He had always prided himself on his control, on being the one who made the hard decisions. But with Emma, everything had changed. He had let himself feel something he had tried so hard to avoid, and now, he couldn't go back to the way things were before. The door to his office creaked open, and Emma walked in, her steps light, but the tension between them was palpable. She was no longer the assistant who worked behind the scenes. She was a partner in every sense of the word, someone who had shared his struggles, his fears, and his triumphs. "Hey," she said softly, closing the door behind her. "Hey," Nathaniel replied, his voice a little rough. He stood up, trying to maintain some semblance of professionalism, but it was clear that the distance between them had narrowed in ways neither of them could ignore. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Nathaniel smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah, just thinking. There's a lot on my mind, you know. But, we made it through." Emma nodded, taking a seat across from him. "We did. But we both know that the real work starts now. We have to figure out what comes next. For us. For the company." Nathaniel's gaze softened. He had always seen Emma as a capable, strong professional, but now, he saw her as something more, someone who had stood by him through the darkest moments of his career, and someone who had proven that their bond was more than just a fleeting attraction. "I've been thinking about that too," Nathaniel admitted, his tone more serious now. "We've been through hell and back, and I don't know what the future holds for us. But I want to figure it out. Together." Emma looked at him, her heart racing at the sincerity in his words. They had both been so caught up in the whirlwind of the company's crisis that they hadn't fully addressed what it meant for their relationship moving forward. Could they keep their personal lives from overshadowing their professional ones? Or would they have to make a choice between one and the other? "I want that too," Emma said quietly. "But we can't ignore the reality of what happened. The board, the investors, the employees, they all saw what happened between us. I don't know how we keep this under wraps now." Nathaniel ran a hand through his hair, frustration flashing across his face. "I know. And I don't have an answer. But I do know that I don't want to lose you. I don't want to go back to how things were before." There was a long pause between them, filled with the weight of unspoken truths. Emma had never allowed herself to be vulnerable like this, not even with Nathaniel. But in that moment, she realized how much she had changed. She was no longer the woman who kept her emotions locked away, who buried her feelings under layers of professionalism. She had found something deeper with Nathaniel, something that was worth fighting for. "I don't want to lose you either," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. Nathaniel walked over to her, kneeling beside her chair, his hand gently taking hers. "Then we'll figure this out. Together. I know we've made mistakes. We've let our personal lives affect our work. But I don't want to live in fear anymore. I want to move forward with you." Emma squeezed his hand, her heart swelling at his words. "I don't know what the future holds, Nathaniel. But I want to take this journey with you. We'll figure out the rest as we go." The following weeks were filled with changes. Nathaniel and Emma worked together to redefine their roles within the company. They made the difficult decision to be open about their relationship, not just to the board but to the entire company. It was a risky move, one that could alienate them from the people they had worked so hard to earn respect from. But it was a move they felt they had to make. They couldn't hide anymore. Their first official announcement to the company came during a board meeting, where Nathaniel stood beside Emma, addressing the room with the same authority he had always commanded, but now, with a new sense of vulnerability. "We've always valued transparency in this company," Nathaniel began. "And today, I want to be transparent with all of you. Emma and I have developed a personal relationship, and we feel it's time to share that with you. We know this isn't the norm, but we've decided to be honest with you, just as we've always been with each other." The room was quiet for a moment, but the tension that had been building slowly dissipated as the board members exchanged looks. They had expected this conversation to be far more dramatic, but Nathaniel and Emma's calm demeanor spoke volumes. They had already weathered the storm together. Nothing could shake their foundation now. The rest of the company was similarly receptive. While there were some raised eyebrows, most people respected their decision to be open and upfront. Over time, the whispers died down, and Emma and Nathaniel continued to lead the company with the same dedication and passion they had always brought to their work. As the weeks turned into months, Nathaniel and Emma settled into a new rhythm. Their professional lives had found a balance with their personal relationship, and the company began to thrive once again. With the leak and the fallout behind them, they were able to refocus on growth and innovation. And in their personal lives, they were learning to navigate the complexities of being in a relationship while leading a business. It wasn't always easy, but it was theirs, and that made all the difference. One evening, after a long day at the office, Nathaniel and Emma found themselves on the balcony of his apartment, looking out over the city. The skyline had never looked more beautiful, and for the first time in a long while, everything felt right. Nathaniel turned to her, his gaze soft and full of meaning. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Emma smiled, leaning into him as he wrapped his arm around her. "We have. And we're just getting started." He kissed the top of her head, pulling her closer. Together. Together. For the first time, Emma felt like they had truly found their balance. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side.